And also for the invitation to speak here today at the Eurocloud Congress, certainly one of the most important events for cloud computing here in Europe. Now, I was asked to give an overview about EU cloud computing policy, probably for a simple and very important reason that Andreas already referred to. Within the next 12 to 18 months, the EU will, one way or the other, establish a policy framework for cloud computing that will really define the terms and conditions that we as cloud providers can do business here in Europe. Now, if it's done well, this policy framework can enhance legal certainty for all of us, for example, by creating a single common market in Europe for cloud computing. It can build trust among users that we all need. But it also can go wrong, creating new regulatory burdensome regulation that would stifle innovation and the development of cloud computing. So we have to get our acts together in the next 12 or 18 months to make sure that this goes in the right direction. The good news is, I heard that Ken Ducatel spoke yesterday. Perhaps you had the same impression, but the good news is the people, at least around Nelly Cruz, the commissioner in charge of the digital agenda, and the staff, like people like Ken Ducatel, they really understand what is at stake. They understand the importance of cloud computing for job creation, for innovation, for economic growth in Europe. Not everybody does in Europe, but they do understand, and they also have been so far very hesitant to come up with heavy regulation for cloud computing. They are really eager to work with us as industry and relying on self-industry instruments to deal with some of the issues that we are facing. But we have to deliver. And again, there's a time window of 12 to 18 months to get this right. That's my key message to you. So what I want to do now in the next 15 minutes is to provide you a brief overview about the platforms and initiatives that are out there, what are the expected deliverables, how these working groups are working, and how you can engage in these activities. So just to start, let's do, how do I do this? Is there a way to... What's this?
Yeah, here we go.
Okay. So to start with just an overview, you heard about there are two main specific regulatory initiative, legislative initiatives that are not made for the cloud, but have a huge impact on cloud computing in the future. You know, the EU is reviewing the Data Protection Directive, which has a huge impact on cloud computing. And they're also working on a new directive for network and information security, where cloud is within the scope, which will lead to a new application for cloud providers. And then, as you probably heard about yesterday from Ken Ducatel, there are the cloud-specific initiatives. The cloud strategy as the main reference paper that is not intended to have new regulation in place. Rather, it identifies a couple of key areas where the Commission believes there should be some action taken in the near future. And in order to make progress in those areas, the Commission decided not to come up with regulation in those areas, but decided to create industry stakeholder groups, expert groups, where we would work with the Commission jointly to tackle one of those issues. There's one group on certification schemes. There's another group that tries to develop a code of conduct for data protection. Another working group is looking into how to enhance fair and reasonable contracting for cloud computing, including SLAs. And the Commission has also asked the European standardization organization, ETSI, in telecommunication, to do a mapping of cloud standardization in the area of interoperability, data portability, and so on. And then the Commission also used public funding. They have public funding available to sponsor two initiatives. Number one, you heard about this yesterday, the pre-commercial initiative called Cloud for Europe, but also then creating a new online tool, kind of a go-to where you can provide and put information on cloud computing, raise awareness. That's the Cloud Watch that is in the pipeline. So these are the bottom-up initiatives that the Commission has launched, but they have also created a high-level advisory committee called the Steering Board of the European Cloud Partnership, made up of CEOs of European IT companies and also national CIOs from the member states to provide high-level advice on what the Commission should be doing in cloud computing. So let's go briefly through all of those, and I heard about, you have dealt already with some of them, so I will be very brief on this and then have a discussion on the more fundamental elements. So just briefly on the relevant legislative initiatives, most important, of course, the Data Protection Directive. This directive from 1995 is outdated, needs to be updated to new technologies like cloud computing, and in particular, there's a lack of harmonization because this directive was implemented in different ways in member states, so we as cloud providers have to deal with 28 different regimes, which is a nightmare. I can tell you at SAP, data protection clauses in our cloud contracts can take up to 6 months to sort this out, with all these complex regulatory environment. So we need this harmonization. If you look at the document that's on the table from the Commission right now, there are positive elements in there leading to harmonization, the idea of a one-stop shop so that we don't have to deal with 28 different regulatory authorities but have just one authority. But there's also a risk of new regulatory burdens, especially now in light of NSA and PRISM. There are attempts now even to strengthen some of the data protection rules, which probably is more a burden than that it really adds value to the discussion. It's not clear yet whether this will be adopted next year. It's probably unlikely, so we probably end up something in 2016, 2017, which would be probably not beneficial because we need this harmonization. Then the directive on cybersecurity, where, as I said, cloud computing is currently within the scope. The idea of this directive is to harmonize the coordination among cybersecurity agencies, which is not the case so far, and it's also kind of burdensome. But the risk is that there will be new breach notification obligations for cloud providers. So basically, if you realize there's kind of a breach, you would need to report it to one kind of regulatory agency. The risk we at SAP see is double reporting, because usually our customers would need to do this, the providers of critical infrastructure. And then nobody really knows, what happens when you file this sensitive information to a regulatory authority. What will they do with it? Is there a risk of leaks? I mean, you can imagine it's kind of a nightmare. So there are risks there as well. I already talked about the cloud strategy, which led then to the creation of these stakeholder groups, and that's where you can engage. So let's focus a little bit on those initiatives. Probably the most important ones are the one on cloud certification schemes and the code of conduct. Now, we all know there are cloud certification schemes already in place. They were not made for cloud computing, but they are relevant for cloud computing. But from an SAP perspective, they have at least two shortcomings. Number one, there's really a lack of transparency. I mean, we have to deal with around 60 of those certification schemes, national ones, regional ones, global ones. We don't always think that adds value. And it's quite irritating for our customers because they don't really understand what they do and what they don't do. So lack of transparency, we have to sort this out. And it's because it's a bottleneck for trust building among users if these schemes don't create the transparency that they should do. And secondly, none of these schemes has a set of controls for data protection that is EU-wide recognized. So the whole area of data protection, which is a real concern for our customers who would like to outsource their due diligence, whether a cloud provider is compliant with data protection rules or not, they simply cannot do this because it's not available. At least nothing that it goes beyond one member state and nothing that is really endorsed by regulatory authorities. So the working group will also address those issues. Now, what we have done so far in the group is we have done a stakeholder survey to identify the relevant schemes that are out there. This is done. And we have also defined a list of principles that these future certification schemes should adhere to. For example, it should be voluntary, based on global standards, business model neutrality, and so forth. And we are now working with ENISA, the European Network Security Agency, on the next steps. And they will be crucial, and we have to get this done by mid-next year. The first deliverable will be kind of an evaluation of existing schemes in the sense that ENISA is working on a questionnaire. This is finalized, with a list of criteria for these certification schemes. How's the governance structure? What do they cover? What they don't cover? And this will then be integrated into a report where you have kind of a description, what they do, what they don't do for all relevant cloud certification schemes. This will be available, will be an online tool by the end of the year. That's number one. And then more ambitious, by mid next year, ENISA plans to do what they call a meta framework for cloud certification schemes. basically what they would plan to do is to categorize existing control objectives and measures out of the existing schemes, put them into different levels and use cases, and then have a matching with the existing schemes. So that would mean if an SME, a customer would say, well, I have these priorities, they can look into the meta framework and say, okay, this is important to me, which are the certification schemes that are important to me? And cloud providers could probably do something similar. Now, it's just early days. We don't know exactly how this will look like. It's kind of complex, kind of ambitious, but we believe it's a step in the right direction to enhance transparency. Now, this work so far will not help us with the data protection stuff, because this is so far focused on data security. Now, on data protection, we need the input of the other working group that develops a code of conduct for data protection. So basically what they're doing is they're looking into the laws in the different member states and also the practices and try to consolidate this and come up with a code of conduct that would be applicable throughout the European Union. That would be a major step. Now this only makes sense and adds value if this is then being endorsed by the national data protection authorities. We have 28 of them, even more so in Germany with all the regional authorities. And they are organized in the so-called Article 29 Working Party. So the plan is to develop this code, industry-driven, among industry players, submit it to the Article 29 Working Party for approval, and then we could translate the code of conduct into control objectives and measures and integrate it into the existing cloud certification schemes. Knowing that part of the measures that already exist for data security can also be used for data protection. Our customers tell us that would be the breakthrough, because then indeed we can outsource the due diligence, not the liability, but the due diligence, whether a cloud provider is in line European-wide with data protection rules. Now, and here I would like to stress we have a time window of 6 months, because we have the full support of the respective commissioners, Commissioner Reding for data protection and Commissioner Cruz for digital agenda. They want this. And they will push the Article 29 Working Party to get this done. But they will only be in office until September next year. So who knows who comes then? We need to get this done in the next 6 months. Otherwise, a huge opportunity probably will be lost. So that was on data protection. Now, where are we on this? The first draft is available, was already discussed with the Article 29 Working Party. And we get important feedback, encouraging feedback. But frankly, it's not, two challenges are out there. Number one is, can we agree among industry on a code of conduct? Because it would mean you get legal certainty, but then you have transparency on the standards that you would need to meet. And there are some players out there who rather like to work with the gray zone. Right? So it's not clear yet whether we have an agreement among the industry partners, the IT players, the cloud providers, on whether this will be substantial enough to get the endorsement by the Article 29 Working Party. That's where we are, a very critical situation right now. So let's briefly then move to the third area where there has been a working group created on service level agreements. They want to address basically two concerns about cloud users. Number one is cloud users find it sometimes difficult to compare service level agreements because it seems that we as cloud providers use different terms which are not really comparable. So the working group is working on a template for server level agreements for cloud providers. That's number one. And the second thing is, especially SMEs, they are not always sure, what kind of aspects do we need to put into contracts. They have no experience with that. So the group is now working on a checklist for aspects that should be part of cloud contracts. It's also a very difficult exercise. Originally, they had planned to finalize their work by the end of the year, but I doubt it that they will get there, so I'm sure there will be some work to be done in the first half of 2014. So, then on the ETS Stakeholder Group, this is basically a mapping exercise where the Commission has asked the standardization body, so okay, don't create a new standard, we are not there yet, but please analyze the existing standards for interoperability, data portability, and so on, and match them with use cases for cloud services and come up with a report saying, okay, this is what the current situation is, and here are perhaps some gaps. So and they're quite advanced in their discussions, and it looks like they will finalize their work by the end of the year, which will then be kind of a data bank for cloud standardization. So I heard that you already dealt a lot with the Cloud for Europe initiative, so I can skip this one. Perhaps just briefly on the CloudWatch, which the European Commission is funding. It's basically will be an online tool where you will find all kinds of information that are relevant for cloud computing about the benefits, how to address security concerns, how to tackle an SLA, or how to deal with data protection, how to deal with data security. So this will be an online tool. There will be a governance structure to, not clear yet who this will be, but the governance structure must be in place to decide what gets on the portal, what doesn't get on the portal. And the reason why I mention this here is this will only be successful if this is being fed by the industry with content. Otherwise, it will be a useless tool. So then finally, the steering board of the European Cloud Partnership. I'm sure Ken talked about this yesterday as well, so I probably don't have to explain what this is all about. I mean, why it was established. But you can see who is on this board. Basically, there are two functions. They should come up with some innovative, creative, strategic ideas how to advance cloud computing, in addition to the bottom-up approach. So that is more the top-down approach. High-level advice for the European Commission on cloud computing. And they also provide guidance for the working groups. For example, recently we were told by the board, well, speed up your work. I mean, it doesn't help if these code of conducts or certification will be in place in 2 years from now. We need them now. We need them in the coming weeks or months, but not in 2 years from now. So that's the guidance we got from the steering board on that one. And the last meeting in Tallinn in July was pretty much focused on how the hell should we react to things like NSA and PRISM, knowing this will have an impact on cloud computing. We already have a problem with trust. And how will this impact cloud computing in Europe, and how should the common European response look like? And in Tallinn, it was decided to work on a charter for cloud computing to address all those issues. So this is still in the drafting process, but I can just tell you, what we are discussing right now. So it's very clear the target audience of this document will be political leaders in Europe, like Angela Merkel or Hollande, and for that we need to make them understand why does it matter for Europe? Not everybody understands that cloud computing is probably one of the main drivers for job creation, innovation, economic growth, especially when you think about that the European economy is driven by SMEs who will especially benefit from cloud computing. So this document will make this very clear, and at the same time make it also very clear we are about to lose this train again, like many other innovative areas. We are lagging behind in terms of uptake, and we are about to miss the boat in terms of creating a single market, because all what's happening right now are national initiatives. G-Clouds here, G-Clouds there, but there's no single market for cloud computing emerging, which we desperately need to realize the scale economies in the cloud. So that's the problem, and then the question is what to do about this. And then we are discussing those 4 areas right now. Number one, certainly we need to become the most trusted region for cloud computing in the world, mainly because data protection, data security matters more in Europe than in other regions. So if we don't come up with these high standards, it will simply not fly in Europe. That's number one. Number two, the importance of the single market. We already talked about this, data protection, but also harmonization of public procurement. And obviously, there will be measures in there to make sure that the public sector becomes an early adopter for cloud computing, because it's the largest IT procurer in Europe. So if they drive it, that would drive overall adoption. The most controversial discussion is on the so-called shared data area. You probably have heard about this. This is basically an idea that came up in Tallinn, saying, when Commissioner Cruz said, well, there's a nice idea, getting rid of all the data location restrictions, that, data can flow, even sensitive data like citizen data or health records can be stored in the cloud anywhere in Europe. But I don't believe that all the 28 member states want to do this. And then somebody, it actually was Thierry Bertrand from Atos, who said, well, why don't we then do something like we did 20 years ago with Schengen, that a few member states go ahead and create this shared data area where the data can move around and we as cloud providers can decide where to put the data centers. Because it makes no sense to have 28 data centers in Europe. Now, so it was drafted, the idea of the shared data area, but it will not fly, I can tell you. There are 3 concerns. 2 of them can be managed, the 3rd one cannot. The first one is, especially the US companies said, well, will this be a fortress Europe where there's no data transfer outside the respective area? Will everything have to be kept within this area? Some of the members of the steering board said, so what? We just replace existing national data location restriction with more European ones. So it's a progress. So why you complain? But then others said, yeah, but then you create a template for Turkey, for Brazil, who all do the same things now. Europe should not lead these kind of border clouds or restricted clouds. Now the solution was quite simple. We added 2 sentences to the effect that the shared data area should not preclude the transfer to 3rd countries, provided the data security and data protection standards are being met. Simple. Like with the harmonization in Europe as well. The second issue is then, will this then really be a shared data area, a pathway to a fully functioning single market, or will it preempt it? Imagine there will be 5 or 6 of those shared data areas with all different standards. You will never end up with a single market, right? But the Commission told us we have ways to deal with that. You know, there are instruments how we can deal with that. So don't worry about this. Okay. But the 3rd concern is the main one. Those who need to implement it, namely the public sector agencies, because that's where all the restrictions are, they are not ready. They're not there yet. They are thinking about consolidation of the data centers nationally. They have no idea whatsoever to think about storing data and processing data outside of their own country. They're simply not there yet. They were shocked when we told them we could think about this. I mean, the cost savings you could realize in this kind of shared data area. So currently it's on hold. Exciting concept, but it seems Europe is not ready for this. So just to conclude what I said earlier on, I mean, one way or the other, in the next 18 months, there will be kind of a framework for cloud computing. Can be bad, can be good for us. And the good news is the Commission wants to work with us. So we have a unique opportunity, but we have to get our acts together. If we don't come up with the right certification schemes, interoperability standards, or code of conduct to deal with those concerns, then the Commission will sooner or later act and impose regulation on us. So that was my presentation. I hope it was not too long.
Thank you very much, Andreas.